Perspective part 2. This one is my favorite kind, because this is where we kind of start breaking the rules of perspective. Kind of finishing up part 1, so to speak, going to cover a little bit of the isometric type of perspective. Essentially, you've all seen it. It's the more regimented, stylized way of representing perspective. There's no vanishing point or horizon line, and things do not get smaller with distance. It was heavily used in architecture and kind of made a big boom on the design scene, maybe 8 years ago. It's nice in animation because since there's no like true vanishing point, you can just kind of animate it all on one plane, still get that faux 3D look without having to animate too many different angles. So just kind of breaking down isometric perspective a little bit more. It's by definition, it just means equal measure. Isometric perspective occurs if the visual plane is oriented into equal angles with the 3 principal planes of an object. So you can see A equals B equals C. And that's just your standard isometric cube. Easiest way to achieve isometric perspective is by working off of a grid. So there's a lot of steps, but it's so easy to make an Illustrator guide. Actually, I can just show you, I know I promised I wouldn't go back and forth, but I can just show you how easy this thing is. So 2 minutes or less, we'll make an Illustrator grid. So take your pen tool. It's not absolutely necessary, but make sure there's no fill. Hold Shift to make a straight line. Highlight it, Shift, Option, Command, and then you press your right arrow, which copies and pastes a line 10 pixels over. Throw a bunch of those things on them. Essentially, you can just Command G to group, stretch it, kind of however you want. So since it's grouped, highlight, you can push Command A to select all. And then Shift, copy it, Shift Command V to paste in place. You can do Rotate tool. I just do Transform because it's just right there. 60 degrees. Copy, paste into place again, and reflect vertically. I don't know why. I can never get it to align perfectly. Doesn't matter. Just kind of push it together. And there's your isometric grid. I mean, it's tedious sometimes, but select all. Oh, I get a little nervous, so I misclick things, but it really is truly easy. And then you can just kind of like make your clipping mask. If you really want to get crazy, you can make this a guide, which is really simple. You just kind of highlight it, guides, and then make guide. But it's not going to let me because I did it wrong first. Regardless, super easy. Let's get back to this. The rules are here. The little guides are here. Or you can just search it on Google. You can find anything. I mean, you can even just download one in it. Or as my favorite way of drawing an isometric form is actually just Storyboard Pro, because you can draw along the line And it's just so easy. And then you can just plop that into Illustrator or Photoshop, however you want. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Isometric perspective, it's beautiful. It's also very, very difficult, I will say, in my experience in animation, because the assets are tedious to make. So if you really, really want an isometric video, you're going to have to just accept the fact that it's going to take a little longer, or you're going to get kind of a meh video. But if done correctly, it is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, look at this thing. This is George Pina. This is for Samsung. It's just a beautiful, beautiful style. Very clean. I'm going to touch very, very briefly on colors perspective, because I think it's kind of ignored a little bit in motion graphics. So color perspective, also known as atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective, it's the method of creating depth in illustration by modulating color to imitate atmospheric haze. So put simply, oh, that's in the wrong place. Three rules. One, object saturation decreases with distance. Contrast decreases with distance, and brightness increases with distance. So here's a couple, like, this is a nice example where the land closest to us is darkest, and then it kind of decreases in brightness as we, or no, increases in brightness as we go back, and the contrast decreases. Again, with the color, in this picture, you can really see an easy way is just adding blue to whatever color and kind of pushing it back that way. Here's another example, fades into blue. You can see high light and dark contrast, but the contrast back here is very, very little. Color perspective, you've got your warmest colors up front, you're getting cooler, and then you're getting coolest. Here's some really wonderful examples that kind of encompass all of these rules. So this one by Oriol Vidal, you can see kind of this, the foreground creatures are very dark. As we kind of push back into the distance, we're not losing clarity, but we are losing kind of saturation, contrast, and it just gets lighter and lighter. So giving the effect that A, this is a very deep illustration, and B, it's, you know, very bright outside. This mountain cabin by Marie Cruchy, Cruciform is her site. I'm so obsessed with her right now. This is a beautiful example as well. You can see it just kind of like very warm up front, very cool back there. She's added a lot of fog, a lot of atmospheric elements to kind of make this misty morning. So those are perspective rules. Now's the fun part to break them. So let's talk a little bit about flattened perspective. And this is something I think most of our videos kind of employ at various times. So in these photographs, it's quite obvious. So it occurs when visual depth is reduced, as if the objects in view have been compressed. They appear to sit closer than they actually are, totally distorting the perception of space. So in photography, artists use a lens to trick the eye into thinking that everything is on the same visual plane, collapsing the perspective. So in this photograph, it kind of looks like all the buildings are just like a piece of paper. They're all smushed into one plane. And then with this kind of photo, it's kind of hard to start understanding where the perspective should lie. So we're just getting some really beautiful graphic kind of shapes in this photograph instead of kind of, you know, perspective as it should be. So While linear perspective is used with the intention of creating depth, this perspective makes images appear flat. We can also apply this flattening technique to illustration. It is a little bit trickier to identify just because illustration is all about stylization. So, you know, it could be flattened perspective or it could just be a stylization. But it's typically used when the viewer is kind of further away from the subject. So again, Marie Laurie, this beautiful cabin illustration, these plants, you know, it's all just pretty flat. We can see that this building doesn't recede back in a typical 2-point perspective, but we still see that there's incredible depth to this photo. I'd like to also add that I love this photo because it's also employing color perspective or aerial perspective, where there's lots of warmth in the front and we kind of like fade all the way back there. She even does that with water. Here are two illustrations employing flattened perspective. This was from a New York Times article on the pandemic. I just thought these illustrations were really perfect examples. So in this New York City one, you know, there's still perspective happening, but it's all very flat, kind of making this beautiful kind of graphic texture. Again, you still understand that this is a place in space, but it's not, you know, bound to the rules of 1-point or 2-point perspective. This Paris, France, I love this. It's kind of hard to tell where everything actually is in space. Even down here, it's like this kind of flat. You can tell it's the top of a building. And in your mind, it does make sense in space, but it is very flat. It does kind of push the boundaries of perspective. I also love this like little sliver of light coming through. I just think that's so beautiful. So flattened perspective continued. This technique can be used by drawing the side of the object straight out, material speller, from its face. We don't actually see it receding back into space like we would using 1- or 2-point perspective, but the implication of depth is there. So a couple tricks, they typically share the same ground and top line, and we can use this to abstract and simplify perspective rules to create new stylization. So I did kind of like a practice. I wonder if I can full screen this. Yeah. So very short, what I did was I just found a house on the internet, and I'm kind of like laying out my ground and top lines. I'm rearranging things because I made it big, and then I'm kind of just kind of going for it, imagining everything kind of on this flat space. I kind of decide to break the rules a little by kind of pushing the stairs out instead of just straight on, but keeping other things straight on. Yeah, making a window. I guess I could have sped this up a little bit faster. You guys are, but it is, doing this is a lot of fun because it really kind of stretches your mind when looking at kind of like objects that are in 3D space, and you're like trying to really visualize it in a stylistic way. I have a lot of fun practicing in this way. So almost just kind of wrapping it up. I'm leaving out a lot of details, but you can see it's good practice. You can use your kind of like imagination to imagine the house, and you kind of like collapse it on its side. Of course, you can add in many more things, take out many more things, but this is kind of how I practice flattened perspective. Ooh, okay, let's go to tabs now. Video time. So this is a very simple video that I love. It really uses flattened perspective well. So yeah, simple. It's so simple, but the bed is, I mean, it's giving off the illusion of depth, but it's just very flattened. But it makes for a beautiful style. I love it. Yeah, me too. So something that we'll touch on, forced perspective. You may hear this a bunch along with flattened. So in photography, it's kind of a goofy kind of method that uses illusion to make objects appear further away, closer, smaller, larger than it actually is. Essentially manipulating the human perception to trick us into thinking there's a correlation between objects when there actually isn't. In the illustration world, this is just the same as flattened perspective. These kinds of images are just stylization. If you were to draw these, you wouldn't say, oh, forced perspective. It's just stylization. But just like a little term thing, they typically mean the same in the illustration world. Has anyone ever done this? Forced perspective, like with their phone? Yeah? Nice. So this guy gets his own page, Jordan Scott. He's really, really awesome. He really kind of masters the flattened or forced perspective. You can see this car. It's turning in 3D space. Like, yeah, it's a little funky of a shape, but it's not actually like moving along two-dimensional. There's no orthogonal lines. It's just flat. I love this illustration down here because it's still flattened perspective, but he uses just a little bit of this like kind of faux 3D to kind of push it just a little bit past the boundaries. And of course, this pencil, a beautiful illustration. There's a lot of movement, but again, baselines, top lines, everything kind of stays in the same place while still just projecting tons of depth. Love that. All right, let's watch another one.
Does your physician see the whole you or just the part they're treating? With Sum Total Care from Summa Health, your doctor sees the complete picture of your health, coordinating with all your specialists and treating the whole you. It's one more way we're helping you own your health. Let's own it together. Summa Health.
Yeah, so again, this whole video, we're kind of on using this flattened perspective, kind of really embraces 2D in a way where you can have these kind of flat vignettes I love this, is my favorite, this kind of like fake 3D turn where we are all moving on the same plane, and it just really
With some total care from Suma,
helps achieve 3D kind of fluid motion when everything just really is just running along these flat lines. Buck, of course. So lastly, let's talk about distorted perspective. So this refers to an accurately drawn or, object, drawn perspective scene that is literally distorted. This can be done by skewing, adding fisheye lens, or any other type of distortion. It's really, when you're kind of breaching into this kind of perspective breaking, it's really important to understand kind of like how these things work in real life so you can properly break them into an illustration. This is a photograph. You can see it kind of looks like someone took everything and just pinched the sides of it and then like kind of blew out the middle like a balloon. Let's see it in action. Short and sweet. This video is so badass for so many reasons, but you can see they kind of used this kind of distorted perspective to like really stretch and make the movement of this ball just seem that much more energetic. You can see here everything's kind of ballooning out, giving it kind of like a puckered, as opposed to like the bloated of a fisheye. Oh, here's another really, really good one. This one's by Giant Ant. If you haven't been to their page lately, you really should. Ballooning is an actually very excellent verb. Yeah, Giant Ant's doing a lot of really cool things with style. I spent way too long on their website yesterday, but
there was a girl named Jen. She wore glasses and couldn't see very well. A boy named Milo asked if he could sit with her. He stood up to the bullies and told them that Jen was smart and nice, and that they should not treat her that way. This gave Jen confidence that the bullies' words couldn't hurt her and that she could do anything. Being kind to people who are different from you can change their whole life.
so aside from like some really awesome use of worm's eye view, if you remember from the previous lesson, it's got this really awesome kind of distorted perspective scene that in this case used as motion, but also kind of like this loss of control. So it's really important to kind of think why you're using this, why you're breaking rules of perspective. Like in this case, it almost looks like she's just barely on her feet, falling through the door, which kind of really pairs nicely from this like distorted bird's eye view. So turmoil and turbulence, a really great way to stretch perspective. So I'm giving this guy a million pages. Rune Fisker is one of my favorite perspective rule breakers of all time. I just adore this guy. His illustrations, I mean, they take kind of all perspective and he just kind of bends it to his own will. You can see here, we've got this like really interesting. It's almost fish-eyed, but like it's also 1-point perspective. But you get this feeling that it's almost, he's got 1-point perspective for this side and a different 1-point perspective for this side. Kind of like, given his illustrations, just kind of this like, everything's always moving. He's so good at kind of using this to keep the eye just dancing around his work. Again, here, it's perspective, you know, it's got that 1-point perspective up, but things are still kind of curved and turned and warped. Here's some more. Here he utilizes kind of skewing the whole scene. It's like, you know, there's perspective kind of going this way, but we're also 1-point perspective back. Here in, oh no, God, I can't click. Here we've got 2 buildings kind of competing and clashing with perspectives. And then we kind of have this up here. We've got, I mean, just the whole thing, it just makes for this like incredible mixed perspective and engaging works of art. Check them out. Let's watch another video. My favorite music memory. Give me a second, because I think I broke the link. Darn it. You'll like this, I promise it's worth it. It's just gone. It was here yesterday. Memory, John Carpenter. Here we go. Sorry about that.
My favorite memory related to music would have to be when I was very, very young. I don't remember how old, but like 4 or 5 maybe. And we lived in a log cabin in Kentucky. So my bedroom was in the back of the house. And near the bedroom was a radio. And it was a wonderful radio. It picked up shortwave and it picked up distant stations. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I was lying in bed, maybe taking a nap, and I could hear the radio playing some classical concerto. And then the radio was off, and then distantly inside the house, I heard almost the same concerto start up again. And I know, what's going on here? So I got up out of bed, and walked through the house and opened doors down hallways and opened the door and came into the living room, and it was my father with his violin playing the concerto that I had just heard on the radio live, playing it. And it was beautiful.
Wow, right? I mean,
Dude,
this video,
that video is so good.
it's like a master class in shape design, but like also perspective. And you can really tell the person who animated this or illustrated this like really knew what they were doing. I just can't imagine the thought behind kind of how these graphic shapes remain so flat, and yet the depth of them is just outstanding. Super cool style.
I love how it's like both abstract and literal too, like the blending of, because there's that one scene where like you just hear the sound and it's this shape like changing shape a bunch, but then it's also like grounded in the real world. I don't know. That's really good. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Super fun. Everything about it. So good. One more. Hand cooking. I also love this video. It's just so much fun.
In the beginning, there were 11 secret herbs and spices. But perhaps our biggest secret, to be quite precise, is the rest of the story. We hope to make it understood of exactly how we're so finger-licking good. It'll only take a moment as my story expands on our approach to cooking that's really quite hands-on. Because way back when the Colonel wrote the book, he declared every piece of original recipe chicken be hand-prepared by a cook. Some other sage advice, and to this day we heed it, was to only cook small batches as you need it. But before it makes its way to our cooks, our ovens, and our fryers, our chicken's been sourced locally, right here from Aussie suppliers. It's this hands-on approach in a hands-free world that makes KFC chicken so delectably delicious. So while you ponder why that last line did not rhyme, I'll be licking my fingers, one at a time. In the beginning.
Silly video, so smooth and beautiful, but I mean, there are just, they use almost every perspective in the book. Flattened, 1 point. I mean, it's just kind of all in there. The best part to me is that, you know, there are multiple, in many of these scenes, there are multiple kind of perspectives. I don't know, Australia. It's because the bugs are so big. Multiple perspectives in like a lot of these, each of these shots. So good. Okay, so last night I threw this in. I'm going to show you guys a couple ways on how to like kind of achieve this kind of distortion in your illustrations. Just a couple fun tips. So last night I quickly sketched up a scene from Taxi Driver. Because I wanted to do a series of a bunch of the shots and I just never went around to it. So it's important before you like kind of go in and try and start distorting your work is you've got to do it when you're in the sketch phase, or else you're in a world of rework. So I've got this sketch layer. I went ahead and duplicated it and turned it into a smart object just so we can keep the pixels. So a couple ways. First of all, let's go to Liquify. This is a great tool to use if you're like wanting to kind of achieve kind of that pucker or bloat fisheye. So for this one, here's the pucker tool. It's like right here. You kind of want to make sure, I've already got this set up. But if you don't make it big enough, you're just kind of like puckering small areas of your work. You don't really want that. So if I kind of wanted to give this piece kind of like a reverse bird's eye where like the cab suddenly feels cavernous. This is the best kind of like distortion tool. Like, of course, I'd go back in and rework this, but you can already see like the illustration kind of taking on this distorted perspective. Of course, after I sketched this, I kind of realized in the reverse. So if you wanted to kind of do the fisheye, this isn't the best illustration to do that on. Yes?
Sorry, I just have a question. This might be a dumb question, but if we do something like this, is it like harder to animate something like this, or?
I think there's, like, I think like in this kind of like pucker view, like, I don't necessarily think so. I think you really have to plan it out. There's a kind of in these videos, like in the examples I showed, like I think there's a pretty good reason that the shots employing kind of this like, especially fisheye perspective, they're very short. I think because it is pretty difficult.
Yeah. So
and
it's not the type of thing you're like gonna do for the whole video, but there are the like moments you can figure out how to animate it, and it like serves a purpose. You're not, it's like a very, I feel like it's a very specific, you wouldn't just do this because you're like, oh, it looks cool. Like it conveys something.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta be intentional with it. But yeah, you can also, this is obviously, wow. But like at the same time, all of a sudden now in that sketch, you get this like overwhelming feeling that this cop is like really pressing into this cab car. So if I really liked this, and you know, there's might be something there if I kind of like modified. It is, yes, very nightmare-y. I could go in and redraw this and kind of, you know, now I've got this distorted perspective. Another thing I like to do if I'm kind of trying to achieve some more movement in my piece is, I guess, first of all, if you wanted to shear it, just, you know, literally shear it, you can go to your move tool and, where is it? Of course, now it's not working. And you can just kind of shear it this way. And because it's a smart object. I'm sorry, guys. Oh. Why?
While you're figuring it out, this sketch is so cool.
Oh, thank you.
I love the guy's ear and hairline. That's so good.
So I'll just go ahead and show you my favorite way to shear things because you got a lot of control. So if you go to filter, distort, and shear, I know that it's maybe a little small on my screen, but you can see like this will actually give you a lot of shearing control. So it's hard to see, but if I kind of wanted the piece to kind of like shear just a little bit, which I think I will, I can kind of mess around with these parameters and kind of get like a little bit of the shear that maybe I'm looking for as a base of a sketch. And I can kind of show you one that I already did this to, the shear where I kind of sheared it. I don't have like a ton of the mid work sketches, but I did kind of sketch this, shear it, and then I redrew it so nothing appeared too distorted. Because when I sketched this scene, I wanted to kind of capture this kind of tilting feel that you get. And if you just kind of drew this straight on, it's kind of missing that. So I kind of further pushed it, especially in the background of this. But typically, I typically do my sketching in Illustrator versus Photoshop. There's no right or wrong way. I think I've thought about it, and I think it's just because I like the option of being able to play around with where the line kind of goes, since I like more of a geometric feel. But again, no wrong way. Oh, a good example of this is if I go all the way back to the misplaced here. So for this isometric homework that I did, I actually sketched this Venice scene in Illustrator. because it's a lot easier to like kind of get those straight lines. And then actually I pulled it into Photoshop and drew all of these lines by hand. So it's just a kind of a fun, I also flipped it accidentally and decided that's the way I liked it. Which brings me to a quick question. Do you guys use actions in your Illustrator? Or, okay, I'm gonna change your life. So I've actually set this up in Storyboard, and every actually thing that I have is the option of a hotkey to kind of like transform. So it's just a quick, instead of having to be like, you know, when you're drawing, you know, it's like, oh, his hair might be a little too big or whatever. It's so easy. You go to Window in any, you know, each software you kind of have the hotkeys, but for here in Illustrator, you go to Actions and you get this like huge list. So you can see I already have one. All you need to do is for this particular action, you highlight what you want, you click record, and then you kind of like record your action. So here, transform, reflect, vertical, okay, deselect, and then stop. So now, depending on like what you've keyed this to, which if you double click, for me, I've done F5. It's just like a really, it's just so handy. You'll save so much time. That probably went by pretty fast. Did anyone kind of need a repeat? I can add a slide on how to do actions in Illustrator if anyone's interested. But again, it's pretty easy. My one tip is obviously select what you have and then hit record and do your action. Don't forget to push stop once you've deselected. So there's no right or wrong way to mess with perspective, except of course learning the base rules first. This is just for reference. And that's it. That's all I have.